Continuing my coverage of the recent Lumix S1II announcement, I want to go over to eoshd.com and read what Andrew Reed has to say. He wrote this piece that there's a good portion of it that I agree with, and there's also some stuff I disagree with. So we're going to read through it, and I'll reply accordingly. This is talking about the S1 Mark II, and he titles the post, "The Panasonic S1II pricing is wrong. So is the entire product strategy." That's a very bold statement, as Andrew has been known to write. He writes very passionately, very provocatively. I think we can appreciate the thought while not necessarily taking it too literally in terms of him thinking he knows best. I think he writes very strongly for good reason, because it's very engaging and it's fun, I guess, from time to time. So we can not overreact. We can read his thoughts and hear what he has to say, as well as take it with a grain of salt or apply our own opinions, perspectives in contrast, which is totally fine. So he starts off the article going through kind of the backstory, cameras he's using. We're going to skip through all that. You can go read this all yourself. I'll put a link to it in the description, but we're going to pick up where, let's see here. We've got the pricing was wrong. Amateur hour stuff. Okay, this is some personal criticism of like his communications with the PR agency. Okay, we've got some backstory on the GH1 and of course DSLRs. GH1 was pioneering, yada yada. We all know the history of the GH4, the GH5, affordability, feature sets, amazing. Everyone super happy with Lumix around that time. And he says, "I don't blame the old guard for retiring after such an amazing run. If that's what some of the most senior Japanese geniuses have done, same goes for marketing people too." So there's this shift that he's pointing out in the Lumix strategy or in their products, where there was this really great run up to the GH5. And then from there, it's been kind of like mediocre. They hit their highs with the GH5, and I don't think they've quite come back. Although that could change with the S1 Mark II. It seems by all accounts, people really like this camera. If you trust all the YouTube reviewers, obviously the camera isn't released yet. So once it's out in the wild, we'll see a little bit more. Maybe there's some problems. Maybe, who knows? These things, product launches are always a little risky. There's always a little hesitation I have to see, is it as good as they all say? But if you trust the YouTube reviewers and all the people there, the S1 Mark II is kind of the new camera to beat. And I'm sure it will be beaten at some point in the future. It's just a matter of who's going to do it, when are they going to do it, and is it actually better, or is it just an alternative, which tends to be the case most of the time. So Andrew goes on, "For some reason, since the full-frame cameras launched in 2018, the product planning has been a total mess, in my opinion. The move to full-frame was done without a reliable autofocus system, which was a terrible error, and the initial cameras were too big and heavy compared to the Sony Alpha and Panasonic GH series." I think that is hitting the nail on the head, truly. Launching the S1 without phase detect, the S1H without phase detect, and the S1R without phase detect was a critical mistake by Panasonic, and one I think they probably regret, because they've clearly embraced phase detect now. It's in the G9 Mark II, in the GH7, in the S5 Mark II, it's in the S9, it's in the S1R Mark II, it's in all the new Lumix cameras. They all got phase detect, good, reliable autofocus. Had they made that move earlier with the S1 initial launch in 2018, I think they'd be in a much better place, just from both probably a profitability standpoint, because I don't know, I don't have any insight into their financials, but just in a general YouTuber, internet zeitgeist, who's talking about what, who's shooting with what. Panasonic really let their lead or their competitive edge with the GH5, they let it slip because they kept pushing the video features forward, but they didn't have this critical autofocus feature that everyone wanted. And so, rightfully so, a lot of people went over to Sony, they went to Nikon, they went to Canon, they went where the features were. And they really missed the mark there, not embracing phase detect earlier on. So I agree with Andrew 100%. The full-frame cameras came at the cost of curtailing sales of their existing Micro Four Thirds, and the GH6 bombed. So that's true as well, although I think kind of inevitable. One of the biggest problems with Micro Four Thirds and the Lumix cameras is that Sony basically had them beat in terms of size, weight, price, and they were offering full-frame sensors. There's plenty of Sony cameras that are pocketable, tiny, and yet they have a full-frame sensor. if you're trying to sell Micro Four Thirds on pocketability, but the bodies are bigger, it doesn't really move the needle that much. Now, granted, the lenses are smaller for Micro Four Thirds generally across the board for the equivalent focal range and for the equivalent aperture. The lenses are smaller, but I don't think a lot of people think that through. I think they see the body size, shape, and they go, oh yeah, that's what I want. Oh, and it's full frame. Oh, and it's got great phase detect. So no surprise there. Andrew goes on, I'm sorry, Panasonic, but the S1 Mark II and the S5 Mark II are just so derivative. All right, well, here's maybe where we disagree. He's looking for a rangefinder GX9 style camera, which I get. I guess there's the enthusiasts out there. I think generally, though, the baseline for any camera company has to be what is the tried and true photography handheld format. If you want these smaller, slimmer, boxier designs, that's fine and cool. And if you want something big and bulky with an extra grip, that's also good. But I think your starting point has to be, it's got a decent grip, you can hold in your hand, you can take pictures, and you can shoot video in a hybrid form factor. I don't necessarily need a rangefinder style, although I do get that people want that. The S9 is kind of close, but people criticize that it doesn't have the EVF. I don't know. I've never missed it on the S9, but that's just me. He goes on, I'll give you the clue. It ain't the S9 as it has no EVF. Oh, he even says it here, or a mechanical shutter, and it's too chunky. It's aimed at social media influencers and beginners. I disagree. I think the S9 is aimed at anyone who wants an S5 Mark II style camera in a even smaller, lower profile form factor. You know, if you don't need the EVF, which let's face it, a lot of us don't, most people don't. Maybe people think they want it, but often they don't actually need it. He goes on, where is the mold-breaking S1H Mark II? That is the question. That's what we're all waiting for. We've been dreaming of. Finally, a solution for 180-degree shutter angle and internal ND filters just completely beyond their ability. I think there has to be something here with the internal NDs that is just either technically too difficult or there's some patent holding everyone back. Because we've all been talking about this for quite a while now. Internal NDs being a bigger deal than what all the camera companies seem to be offering. They're few and far between. They trickle out here and there in certain cameras and then not in others. And you're wondering, what is the holdup? I'm hoping that the S1H Mark II can solve that, but no one knows because that's not even leaked or rumored. Well, it's certainly speculated, but we have no definitive idea of if or when that's even coming. Where's the answer to China? So AI and smartphones. Okay, he goes on. Panasonic with the S1II and the S1R Mark II back in 2020 when Canon brought out the R5 and the R6. So this is the interesting criticism in hindsight. The S1 lineup, yes, launched without phase detect, but then it also ran smack into COVID. And then Canon and Sony and even Nikon kind of came out of that with their best of the best after that initial crazy time, where Panasonic ran headfirst into it. And I think that the timing and the feature set was just all wrong. It was a huge blow. And we can see in hindsight, like, oh, it would have been better had they done it differently. Half of that was their error, not giving us the features we wanted. But the other half was just, it was a really unfortunate time for them. Whereas, Canon and Sony maybe navigated that a little bit better with the right features at a better point in time. Andrew says 2025 and it's party time, or is it Attack of the Clones? The S5 II seems to have been cloned and now all of a sudden have 5 almost identical cameras. All but one are standard 24 megapixel sensors in the same body design. I don't think this should be that surprising because I think by all accounts, the S5 Mark II is actually a pretty popular camera. There's plenty of people shooting with the S5 Mark II. Maybe you're one of them. I certainly picked up an S5 Mark II once I heard all the buzz and was like, okay, maybe there's something to this. It's got phase detect, it's full frame, it's got all these things, it's not going to overheat, it's actually worthwhile. And sure enough, I will attest to that. The S5 Mark II is a great camera. So I think if you're going to copy anything, copy your best, copy what's working. If people are buying the S5 Mark II, double down, triple down on that. That's good business sense. Maybe it doesn't check every box and it's not a rangefinder style and it's not cool like a hipster, Fujifilm camera or Olympus or whatever your favorite, brand is. But if it's working for Lumix, I think that's wise to follow that trajectory. Take those features and sure, put them in an S9. Take that body style and apply it to your S1 lineup, because Andrew himself just said that the S1 lineup was too big and heavy compared to Sony at the time. I think the S5 Mark II is that perfect middle ground where it's got room for all the components that need to go inside it, but it's not too big and too bulky. It's kind of Goldilocks and it's just right. It may not be right for everyone. People have different bigger hands, smaller hands, whatever. But in general, I think the S5 Mark II is popular, and it's popular for a reason. So it would be wise for Panasonic to copy their success. So he complains about the S5D, the S5II, the S5IIX, the S1E, and the S1II. Although the S1II is radically different, the sensor is very different. Even though the body might be similar in spirit, the sensor is very, very different. It's 24 megapixels, but it's much faster in the S1II. So I wouldn't say it's a clone. Maybe this just comes from when he wrote this article, not having a full appreciation or understanding of the S1 Mark II. But I think now, look, like we know the S1 Mark II is very different in terms of sensor tech. But, you know, if he's just talking about the body style, then yeah, I guess it's very similar. Only one of these needed to exist, and that was the S1 Mark II. It needed to exist sooner, at least 3 years sooner, instead of this silly original S5, not ages later, that after the R6II and the A7 IV had joined the party. That is always true. If you can get your best stuff out earlier, yeah, I think we would all appreciate that. For some reason, Panasonic was slow. Maybe they were set back. Maybe they didn't have the right resources or circumstances. I don't know internally what's going on over there. I'm glad that we finally are getting the S1 Mark II, and Panasonic abandoning cameras and the L mount is dead, and all this, the fear mongering that goes on, the doom and gloom that people try and spread. Is this the end of Panasonic? Well, they're still pushing things forward with the S1R Mark II, with the S1 Mark II, the S1IIe. The S5 Mark II, I imagine, is still selling very well to this day. I actually bumped into someone who was filming with 2 of them the other day. So it's, I never ran into anyone who had a GH6 or a GH7 or any of the Lumix stuff. So the S5 Mark II is catching on to the point where, it is out there. Is it the most popular? No, but there's more people shooting with it than I think some of the other recent Lumix cameras. So if it had been the S1 Mark II, yeah, they would have gone with that, but we're getting it now. And so that's, I think, good. Let's be thankful for what we got. Yes, should it have been sooner, 3 years ago? Yeah, probably I would agree with that, sort of, but there's also all the limitations behind the scenes that we'll never have insight into, probably. So I'm glad we're actually getting it, and Panasonic is still in the game. Lumix is still cranking out cameras. That is a good thing. So let's, I think, focus on that rather than like hindsight, oh, you should have done it sooner. Yeah, but they didn't. So here we are. Throw in the S1R Mark II and the Panasonic S9, and it brings a total number to 7 second-generation L-mount cameras in the space of 2 years. Crazy. That is crazy how much they're pushing. For the longest time, everyone was criticizing Panasonic for, where's the cameras? Where's the cameras? Where's the cameras? Now that they're rolling cameras out, the problem is they're making too many cameras? I don't know. Pick your poison. I do think it's a little overwhelming, the amount of cameras that are out there, and all the SKUs and variants and tracking which one does what. But I'm glad that we have the options compared to before, which was like, there was the S1, the S1H, and the S1R, and that was it. And then the S5. No, I think we need more options than that. And to keep things active, push it forward. And now we just need the lenses to support that. We got a lot of camera bodies out there, certainly more to come. If we're speculating there's an S1H Mark II on the horizon, let alone, they'll probably be smart and make an S5 Mark III at some point. What could that camera even be? I don't know, but the cameras will keep coming. So now we need lens options as well to support. The difference in all these cameras would take a heck of a lot to explain to the average customer. That's true, but the same is true for Sony, who is the most popular, arguably, on the internet anyway, in terms of who talks about what. Canon has a lot of variants out there. They got the R5, the R6, the R7, the R8, the R3. There's so many Canon cameras. Lots of Nikon options, the Z8, the Z9, the Z6, the ZF, the ZR. Maybe now rumored, speculated that that's the first red Nikon is on the horizon. Sony A7C, the A7 Or the A7S, the A7 basic standard one. They've also got like their A6500 and all these crazy numbers and letter combinations that I can't even keep track of. So every company is doing this, and I don't think you can say it doesn't work, because the problem was that the criticism was of Panasonic, they didn't have enough options. And now that they're rolling out more options, I think that's a good thing. It is confusing and it is overwhelming, and I wish it was a little bit clearer, more obvious, but I would say the same thing is true of all the camera manufacturers. I also think that although the Lumix S9 is a fun little camera, it is the worst marketing and high profile launch I've ever seen as long as I've been around. Well, okay. I mean, I don't really have any insight into that. I think the S9 is selling decently well. It's affordably priced, and for the features that it has, is a really good camera. I actually really like the S9 for what it can do. It's not the perfect camera for everybody, but I think, I don't know. I think they're selling them. I'm not sure. Was this camera some sort of knee-jerk reaction to the rise of content creators and vloggers? Yeah, there's always this weird thing that when these companies focus on marketing to influencers, they always fail. Just make good products. That's all you have to do. Whether you're Panasonic, Canon, Nikon, Sony, just make something good and don't worry about being trendy. Don't worry about content creators and vloggers. That always feels so bad in the marketing whenever they push that. So I can sympathize there. But also you can also just look at the product and say, does it do what I need it to do? And if so, go ahead and buy it. In the Micro Four Third days, they had a shower of enthusiast level rangefinder style cameras with EVFs and mechanical shutters. And now in the full frame era, they have a big fat 0. None of this makes any sense. I assume that's because those didn't sell. I think they would make them if more people bought them, but I think they're incredibly niche and they're just not for the general consumer. Maybe you can make those when you have sales of a GH5 supporting it, but if you don't have a core foundation for your business, if you don't have a lot of sales funneling money into the business, how are you going to go make some wacky exclusive, what Sigma is doing with their BF? Like, I think they're doing that because they're selling lenses. I don't think they're doing it because that camera itself is going to be profitable. Maybe each sale of the camera is profitable, but it's probably not enough to keep the business afloat, right? You can make a profit on any one product, but if you only sell 5 of the products, that's not sustainable. You need to sell both something that's profitable and at a mass volume, which is again why I talk about popularity of these cameras so much. It doesn't matter if they're popular or not from it literally doesn't matter if it's popular, if you can use the camera to do the job, but it does matter if it's popular for the sustainability of the business. I hope that makes sense. So this is why I hammer on it. I'm not saying buy things because they're popular. I'm saying the products need to be popular for the companies to succeed. Why was this popular form factor leapt upon by Panasonic and then abandoned, seemingly for no reason? He says that the rangefinder style is popular. I've never bought one of those cameras, so maybe personally I have a just totally different perspective. I don't know. I'd have to see sales figures, and a lot of times you'll get sales figures, but it'll be from Japan, and we're not seeing the American sales or the European sales or wherever, global sales. I think they know internally at Panasonic what's working and what's not. So I would assume that they would be focused on driving sales, their business. I don't think they're trying to lose. So it seems like there's something about that rangefinder style they just don't think is worthwhile for the time being. Maybe that'll change in the future, but I wouldn't knock them too much. Aside from if you personally like it, that's one thing, but you can't say the company is stupid for not making what you want them to make. That's the difference. You can only assume that Panasonic thought that an Instagram camera could gain them significant sales. I don't think this strategy has worked. I don't know. I think the S9 has worked the way they wanted it to, is my guess, but that's, again, just from intuition. I don't have any hard facts on that. The other major problem I have with the new cameras is the pricing. With the kit lens, we were talking $3,600 in the UK for the S1II and the S1II with the kit lens $3,000 once you swap the figures around. So he complains again about the PR agency. The body-only prices are too high. Just worryingly, this has been the case with Micro Four Thirds since the G9 Mark II and the GH7, too high. Yes, but so it's too high compared to the competition, because if you're comparing, like, if your idea is that there are 1,000, hypothetically, let's say there's 1,000 photographers out there in the wild, and 900 of them are shooting I don't know, let's say Canon, for example, and you have 100 people shooting Lumix and you're trying, and that's your pie, you have to make something better and cheaper to get those people to leave Canon to come to Lumix, right? Now, granted, that's a little bit more complicated in the real world, but in general, that's kind of how I think all the pricing, we all mentally think about it, that to get people from one system to another, you have to be better and cheaper. And in the current landscape, the Lumix cameras seem to be better in some regard, but they're not cheaper. So it's maybe giving people pause, like, hey, no one's going to buy this if it's not cheaper than what Nikon is offering, than what Canon is offering, what Sony is offering. So if you frame it in that perspective, yes, it's expensive. The price is too high, but that's more from a strategy perspective, more of a attracting consumers. And I don't know that you can apply that strictly to the economy and the way that it actually works. Maybe there's people who are upgrading from their smartphone and they're just comparing it. Hey, these are the rough prices. The A7S III is kind of older and it's more expensive. This new S1 Mark II looks pretty cool. I'm going to get that. Maybe there's a lot of consumers out there who aren't really doing the price evaluation, literally looking at, okay, is this the exact same sensor? The Z6 Mark III by Nikon is the same sensor that's in the Lumix S1 Mark II, and the S1 Mark II is more expensive, so it's a ripoff. The price is too high. I don't know that that's how most people buying cameras look at it. They might look at it from YouTubers reviewing it, from hype, from enthusiasm, from marketing, and just in general say, I want this thing, and the price is what most flagship camera prices are, so I'll buy it. You look at Leica, and their prices are absurdly high, but people still buy those cameras, but they're a different segment of the audience. So I think the price being too high, maybe for Andrew, maybe even for me, it's something I've mentioned in the past. Like the price on the G9 Mark II is too high. I think the price on the GH7 is too high relative to other value that's out there. And that's how I'm usually talking about it. But if your release price is one thing, that gives you room to go down. If you release it too cheap, then you can't go down from there. I don't know if that sort of makes sense, but I think there's always perspective when it comes to the pricing that I myself have not always been as clear in the past as maybe I should have been in how I describe these things. It's all relative. It's down to the individual, but it's also the landscape. And I think in general, prices are going up. So the fact that the S1 Mark II is the same price as the original S1, which was also expensive at the time, don't get me wrong, saying that it's too high is maybe a strategy diagnosis versus a literal, like, is the price actually too high? Probably not, just considering where prices are in general and what cameras and their prices happen to be. We'll see. We'll see how it sells. I think a lot of people are going to buy the S1 Mark II, though. It just seems like the type of camera that a lot of people would be enthusiastic about. And then that means the more cameras that are out there, the more that enter the used market, driving prices down, as well as over time, you've got Black Friday, you got Cyber Monday, you got holiday deals, discounts, bundles, all sorts of things. So the price probably won't get higher. You've also got to factor in, maybe they're calculating some kind of tariff or prediction there. Blackmagic announced their pricing and then immediately had to increase the pricing because of some tariff concern. So maybe that's another factor in the S1 Mark II pricing, is kind of hedging that bet there, figuring out, okay, what is the right price for this camera, given the features, given the landscape, given consumers. And I think it's probably spot on where it's at. Andrew says it's too high. Difference of opinion, but I do disagree. Panasonic have built their reputation on value for money. What's happened? That is true. I think Panasonic has always been best bang for the buck, high value. But I also think that hasn't really helped them either. When you look at just how much Sony has taken up all the attention for these hybrid cameras. So price isn't everything. It certainly has features, it's performance, it's all of it. It's a whole package. Kind of, you got to factor everything in together. You can't blame tariffs. These are the UK prices. The real US prices are likely to be even higher once the camera ship. I guess we'll see. It remains to be seen. In the case of the G9 Mark II, people are clamoring to spend $2,000 on a 2x crop sensor camera. You can get a very good mid-range full-frame camera for less. Absolutely. That's something I do agree with, because again, relative perspective when you're comparing, it's one thing to compare two full-frame cameras, but to compare Micro Four Thirds to full frame, At the time, the G9 Mark II was more expensive than the S5 Mark II, if I'm remembering correctly. Or they were very, very close, certainly. One is full frame, the S5 Mark II, the G9 Mark II, micro four thirds, same exact body, same everything, aside from the S5 Mark II has the bigger sensor and was actually cheaper because it came out earlier. G9 Mark II releases at a similar or maybe even slightly higher price point, and it's more prone to overheating. All of a sudden you're wondering, like, what are they doing? What are they thinking over there at Panasonic? So that is one I will agree with. However, if you're comparing full frame cameras from different brands, it's a different conversation. Comparing the S1II to like the Nikon Z6 Mark III, something like that. Slightly different conversation in terms of value, features, because then you are comparing apples to apples, so to speak. And the price differences are just come down to like, what are the features? Maybe the S1 Mark II being able to do full frame, uncropped, open gate 60 at 5.1K, maybe that is worth the extra $1,000. Maybe the benefits to dynamic range over the Z6 Mark III, which seems to be the S1 Mark II has the edge there. Maybe that's worth the extra $1,000. That's up for the individual to decide. But at least you're comparing full frame to full frame, not going like, well, the micro four thirds one is more expensive than the full frame one, and they're by all accounts very similar. And the G9 Mark II also will overheat in video where the S5 Mark II won't. It seems kind of silly. Granted, different lenses, different. Everyone can have their favorite, but the G9 Mark II was, I think, a misstep in some regard. But then they fixed it with the GH7, so at least there's that. He goes on to talk about the S1 Mark IIe, I think, with the cropping and cinemascope. And really, I do like the real-time LUTs. Okay, so here, let me slow down here. It's basically an S5 with so he's talking about the S1 IIe. And then he goes on to praise it a little bit. I do like the real-time LUTs. I love the 2.4:1 look. In stills mode, I love the X-Pan style. Great for framing raw or JPEG. And Fujifilm doesn't have it. And I like Panasonic's commitment to anamorphic modes. I like the introduction of 32-bit audio. I love Vlog. The image quality is very good. Panasonic's codecs are excellent. Such a wide array of modes. Clearly, somebody in engineering is doing the right thing, only for the product planners and marketing to make a total mess of it. Anyway, about the pricing, if you are Canon, Sony, or Nikon, you'd probably get away with it. But Panasonic, $3,000 for an S1 Mark II. They don't have anything with a flagship sensor in it. I mean, this S1 Mark II sensor seems to be pretty good by all accounts, but I don't know. I guess it remains to be seen for me personally. I haven't tested it myself. They have no stack sensor, so they only have partially stacked. Okay, no proprietary internal RAW codec like NRAW or BRAW. They have ProRes RAW. I don't know why it has to be proprietary. Okay, and then someone made the silly decision to have the middling S5 II form the basis of all future camera bodies. But again, I don't know that's a silly decision if the S5 Mark II is selling well. If people like that, it's not a silly decision to double down on it compared to trying some other random thing that's unknown, that's untested, it's unvetted. So this is a little bit interesting. He praises it for a few things, but then complains that they're doing something based on what's worked for them in the past. Again, I'm not saying he's wrong. I'm just saying I don't see it that way. Then there's the small matter of autofocus. Out of all the major mirrorless brands, the latest Panasonic cameras are still only fifth behind Sony in first, Nikon in second, Canon in close third, and you could say the OM system. So again, focusing on autofocus is what everyone's focused. Autofocus. They're all doing phase detect. They're all doing it reasonably well. You could say that Sony's the best, Canon's second best, Nikon's second best, Canon's third best, whatever. But they're all good. They're all reliable. They're all working. And this is where I get a little bit maybe more irritated. Nowhere in here are we talking about open gate. One of the biggest advantages of Lumix, it's nothing to sneeze at. Open gate, you're adding significantly more vertical resolution, extra pixels that every other camera manufacturer, when they're recording video, is just throwing it away. Nikon, Canon, and Sony, they're just throwing it all away, and they're saying 16:9, that's all we care about. Lumix is over here pushing their technology to the absolute limit, recording all that extra space. And we know that it's difficult because they can do the opposite and get away with like more. You can push your frame rates higher. You can get 4K 60 when you crop it to 2.4 to 1, right? So you can crop it one way and get more out of that sensor. And they're doing it the opposite direction. They're giving us open gate, the full sensor in video. That is nothing to sneeze at. It's very, very impressive. Not even mentioned really in here. Also, Lumix, best in class for in-body image stabilization. Not only are we getting the best IBIS, they're improving their own IBIS by giving us a high stabilization mode. And now they're doing the cropless stabilization as well, using some kind of like warping proprietary tech that they've developed to do like cropless stabilization. By all accounts, the stabilization is the best. And Sony, Canon, Nikon are all not even really close in terms of performance compared to Panasonic. So you got open gate, you've got IBIS, you've got great features, video features that we don't like, all the codecs, shutter angle, of course, that we've talked about a million times over. They've got their autofocus fixed. They've given us a full frame camera. And yet we have a whole paragraph here about how autofocus is like, oh, they're bad at autofocus. Still, they're not the best at autofocus. Not giving them credit for the achievements that they have made, in addition to embracing phase detect autofocus. And that's what I'm always kind of wondering or questioning of like why autofocus is highlighted to such a degree that it is the only thing people focus on. And it doesn't matter the resolution. It doesn't matter the frame rates. It doesn't matter it's just autofocus. That's the one thing. And I think that's like this weird baggage that Lumix kind of built for themselves for the longest time, doing DFD, depth from defocus. And that baggage is still with us today, even though they've abandoned it, even though they've moved to phase detect and they've got phase tracking and it's not pulsing anymore. It's working really, really well. People still cling to this autofocus being the most important thing, not highlighting how bad these other companies are at IBIS, how these other companies aren't giving us open gate, which is a technical marvel. So that's where I want maybe a more fair comparison or an honest critique where no matter how good of a camera Lumix releases, there's still people out there saying, yeah, but Sony's got better autofocus. Do you know how much Sony, oh boy, they're still giving us, memory cards with crazy folder structures. They're still giving us terrible menus. They're still giving us cameras that overheat. They're still not giving us open gate. They're still all the things that are wrong with the Sony cameras. They're tedious. They're annoying. They're like a glorified TV remote in terms of operation of the camera body itself. But because they got autofocus right in a full frame mirrorless camera first, and they perfected it, it is now somehow the golden and the only standard that gets compared to. Lumix could release the best camera, which seems to be, they've released the S1 Mark II, and there's still people going to say how it's not enough because, Sony can do this one other thing better. We've watched some videos talking about, Sony can track an object. And I'm sitting there going like, what? Do you need to track an object more than you need open gate? You need to track an object more than you need the best, like good IBIS? Because a lot of the Sony cameras, the IBIS isn't even good. I would say it's like mediocre at best. So I don't know. It's just there's a lot of perspective. There's a lot of context that this baggage carried with Lumix to this day is so frustrating to see how people talk about it when they're releasing killer cameras. Like the GH7, awesome camera. The S5 Mark II, awesome camera. Even the S9, awesome camera. Now the S1 Mark II looks to be an awesome camera. And we get a whole paragraph about how their autofocus is not the best. I just kind of laugh and say, okay, but you're kind of like tunnel vision here. You're missing the bigger picture of how well-rounded these cameras are compared to everybody else. All right, I'll move on. Is the S1II a badly designed, poorly spec'd camera in 2025? No, it's merely an overpriced mid-range camera that we waited 7 years for. And during that time, the other brands have been going gangbusters with stack sensors, 8K 60 internal RAW, and cutting-edge autofocus. Panasonic will have to do more if they want to avoid spiraling into sales oblivion. I think the S1 Mark II is going to sell. That's just my personal prediction. If I had to make a bet, I think the S1 Mark II will be a popular camera. I think it will get people to L mount. They'll buy lenses where they're going to need more, and it's just that chicken or egg scenario. Sony has been at this game the longest. Full frame mirrorless, it's their bread and butter. They're going to keep releasing cameras. Nikon is, bought up red. They're going to keep releasing cameras. Canon, everyone knows and loves Canon. They're going to keep releasing cameras. Things just keep moving forward. Panasonic is on the right direction. Their errors, they've corrected, and they'll only get better from here. So I'm glad to see it. I'm excited to see even more like internal ND, if or when it ever actually comes. And let's not forget, Panasonic, another one of the big features is the 32-bit audio recording. The XLR2 adapter is great. Even the original XLR1 adapter was probably the best implementation of XLR on a hybrid camera. So there's a lot that they get right over and over and over again, and they optimize and they perfect and they make these wonderful cameras. And yet, for some reason, it's never enough. And I would wager at this point, it is really down to marketing, just the Panasonic Lumix. I think that naming is confusing for people. I think that you only have the resources that you have. And unfortunately, Panasonic Lumix being lower in the totem pole of who's selling the most, they just have less resources at their disposal. Their R&D has to be less because they just don't have the same amount of cash as these other companies. They're not selling as many in terms of cameras. These companies are massive, right? Sony, Panasonic, they do a whole lot more than just cameras. But speaking purely for cameras, those sales figures, that popularity is going to matter a lot because that's what fuels your next cycle of development. That's what gives you the money for that R&D to make the most of it. Consider how much we're getting from Panasonic Lumix, considering how low on that totem pole they are. I think that's actually quite impressive. And if I had to bet on anyone, the moment they fix some of those problems that they have already done, the S5 Mark II has phase detect autofocus. The G9 Mark II, the GH7, we've had phase detect autofocus for a while now. They've moved to full frame. It's only going to get better the more they keep releasing cameras like the S1 Mark II, because those sales will fuel future development. You could wish that it was here earlier. You could wish, 7 years too late or whatever. But the fact is these cameras are coming out now, and it doesn't seem like Sony and Canon and Nikon are actually really pushing things as much as they ought to be. Yes, they do have some unique features, 8K 60, that's cool. You've got those little things that are impressive that do push the industry forward, but relatively so, considering the size of some of these companies, considering the investment that they're able to make based on their sales data, which again, I don't know. I don't work for these companies. I have no idea. All I'm doing is reading the tea leaves. I'm, fortune teller, checking the horoscopes, just, using my intuition. It's really impressive what these Lumix cameras are doing. And that's for me, is such a good sign for where things are headed in the future, if and when we finally get an S1H Mark II, if the S1 Mark II sells like I think it probably will. What's an S5 Mark III look like? What does the S9 Mark II look like? What does an S7 or an S3 look like? There's a lot of room to grow and expand their camera lineup. They're just getting started, and those sales will fuel future development. That is just how it works. And there is something to be said about the giant company sitting comfortable, sitting easy, and losing in the long run because there's too much bloat, there's too much waste, there's too much expense, not really doing a whole lot of anything. Sometimes the smaller companies end up having that edge because they're more nimble, they're more quick, they're more flexible, they're more adaptable. I'm not saying that's Panasonic. Maybe that's some portion inside of Lumix. I don't know. I can't predict the future. But I know it's not always as clear as, Sony is amazing and they're always going to be amazing, or Canon's on top, they're going to be on top forever. These things change over years, over decades. And something like the S1 Mark II gives me a lot of hope for the future and where things are headed, both for now, using a camera that can shoot 5.1K, uncropped, open gate, 60 frames a second. That's massive. With phase detect, it's full frame. It's got the best in class IBIS, all the great, amazing Lumix features. If that's not something to be excited about, if that's something to complain about, I don't know what you could possibly want other than, just to keep harping. Like, I guess the criticism fuels them to make them better. Maybe that's what Andrew's thinking. Like, oh yeah, Panasonic, like I'm just going to, tease them a little bit, give them a hard time so they keep getting better. And maybe that's true. Maybe that'll work. But I think it's also really good to acknowledge when something is done well. And I think for the most part, from the outside looking in, based on the YouTube reviews, based on current climate, the S1 Mark II looks like a winner. And unless something terribly catastrophic happens and it's awful, maybe I'll rent it and I'll hate it. I don't know. It could happen. But all signs point to that being nearly the perfect camera for most people. And if you're going to say that's bad or that missed the mark, or I guess you can think that. But my thought is, this is great. Let's see more of this. Let's get the S1 Mark II and let's put an ND system in it. Let's, I don't know, push it to its limit. Let's get a timecode port on there. Let's do something for that S1H Mark II. Let's put a fan in it so it's extra. I think there is a fan in the S1 Mark II, but a better fan so it's never going to overheat on you. Let's max it out with an S1H Mark II, and then let's see an S5 Mark III. Let's see an S9 Mark II. Keep pushing these things forward so they keep getting better and better and better, because that's clearly the path that Lumix is on. These things are getting better. And I don't know what there is to complain about that.